A flawless smile, rehearsed perfectly in the mirror. That was all my sister needed to play the angelic daughter for 30 years, draining our family legacy dry. But as she spoke her triumphant words in the blinding boardroom on the 40th floor, that smile froze. She never suspected her arrogance was the trigger to a time bomb our supposedly dementia-ridden mother had buried. The most brutal revenge arrives inside a sealed, yellowed envelope. Hello and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for your continued support and for being such a wonderful audience. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the operating budget to continue uploading new videos here in the near future. So we will be transitioning our operations to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you will get access to exclusive, much longer true stories with deeply detailed situations and multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join us right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the comments section. Let us begin today's story, told through the eyes of Farah Klein. The glass-walled boardroom of Sterling and Vance on the 40th floor suspended us high above the gray, weeping clouds of downtown Seattle. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady drone that did absolutely nothing to cut through the suffocating tension in the room. It was the kind of heavy metallic atmosphere you could slice right open with a knife. For 45 minutes, the only sounds had been the crisp rustle of legal bond paper, the dull thud of heavy leather portfolios opening, and the quiet, aggressive murmurs of corporate negotiation. Through it all, I sat entirely motionless at the furthest corner of the polished mahogany table. I was a phantom in my own family's affairs. My hands rested flat and calm upon the scarred, cold surface of an outdated aluminum briefcase equipped with heavy mechanical combination locks. I had not spoken a single word since stepping out of the elevator. I simply watched the theater unfold, letting the seconds tick by, absorbing every micro-expression, every shift of weight, every lie. My sister, Sloane, was positioned at the exact center of the table, bathed in the flattering glow of the recessed lighting. She was delivering the performance of a lifetime. Sloane was playing the role she had spent 3 decades perfecting, the exquisitely wounded, fiercely dutiful daughter. Her charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, projecting an aura of sophisticated grief. Across the wide expanse of the table sat a phalanx of merciless corporate attorneys and acquisitions representatives from one of the largest cosmetics conglomerates on the globe. They were hungry, circling the scent of profit, but Sloane was charming them all. The focal point of this elaborate dance lay right in front of her perfectly manicured fingertips, a towering stack of meticulously drafted acquisition contracts. The final page required only her signature to authorize a buyout worth $15 million. $15 million in exchange for the absolute intellectual property rights to our mother's lifetime of botanical research. However, the conglomerate's legal team was thorough. A senior partner, a woman with steel gray hair and predatory eyes, raised one final, minor objection. It was a standard query regarding the absolute certainty of the inheritance transfer, a final verbal confirmation to ensure no lingering sibling disputes could derail the acquisition post-signing. The lawyers wanted complete assurance that the estate was cleanly and entirely in Sloane's hands. Sloane leaned forward, sensing the finish line. This was her element. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, letting out a soft, trembling sigh that expertly conveyed exhaustion and profound loss. She lifted a slender finger and gently wiped away a tear that absolutely did not exist at the corner of her eye. She looked around the room, capturing the pity of every executive present, and offered a brave, tragic smile. She looked directly at our family's lead attorney and spoke in a tone of devastating, practiced sincerity. "Mom always loved me more." The words hung suspended in the chilled, sterile air of the boardroom. It was the exact phrase, the precise, arrogant combination of syllables I had been waiting to hear. Before the final echo of her voice could even fade into the background hum of the ventilation, I moved. My fingers, cold and steady, found the dual dials of the aluminum briefcase. 3 precise clicks to the left, 3 precise clicks to the right. The heavy metallic snap of the latches releasing cracked through the quiet room like a gunshot. The sound was so jarring, so alien to the hushed corporate environment, that two of the conglomerate executives physically flinched. I lifted the metal lid with agonizing slowness. The hinges groaned softly from the dark velvet interior. I reached in and extracted a single, solitary item. It was a thick yellowed envelope, heavily sealed with dark crimson wax. Across the front, scrawled in the unmistakable, shaky, left-handed cursive of our late mother, was my name. I did not slide it. I did not toss it. I placed the envelope down onto the center of the mahogany table with deliberate, quiet force. The dull thud it made seemed to shift the entire gravitational pull of the room. Our family's lead lawyer, a sharp man who had navigated our estate for 20 years, glanced down at the table. His eyes locked onto the handwriting. In less than 2 seconds, every single drop of blood drained from his face, leaving him the color of old ash. Without uttering a single sound, he reached out with a trembling hand, grabbed the edge of the $15 million contract, and violently slid the entire stack of papers far across the polished wood, completely out of Sloane's reach. Sloane's breath caught in her throat. Her brilliant, tragic smile died instantly. It did not fade gracefully. It abruptly stopped, freezing mid-expression as the muscles in her face locked in sudden, absolute terror. Her eyes darted frantically from the relocated mountain of money to the pale, sweating lawyer, and finally anchored onto the yellowed envelope resting beneath my unmoving hand. The suffocating heat of her ambition vanished, replaced by an atmosphere that dropped to absolute zero. The air in the room had changed permanently. Her perfect, manipulated reality was fracturing into 1,000 pieces, and she had just realized she was the one who handed me the hammer. To understand how a single yellowed envelope could completely paralyze a room full of apex predators, you have to understand the soil it grew from. Not the metaphorical soil, but the literal, dark, loamy earth of our family farm in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. Eleanor Klein, our mother, was never a traditional businesswoman. She was a master botanist, a woman who communicated with root systems and cellular plant structures with far more fluency and affection than she ever showed to human beings. For 40 years, her entire universe was contained within the humid glass walls of her commercial greenhouses. She was a quiet genius of organic chemistry, dedicating her entire life to crossbreeding incredibly rare, proprietary essential oil formulas. Her extractions were not merely perfumes or simple remedies. They were chemical masterpieces, complex botanical matrices that bordered on the miraculous. And then there was Sloane. If our mother was the dirt and the quiet science, Sloane was the glossy, heavily filtered photograph of a blooming flower. Sloane was the undisputed golden girl of our family dynamic, armed with a radiant, effortless smile, devastating social grace, and an innate, terrifying ability to manipulate the emotional temperature of any room she walked into. She seamlessly positioned herself as the face of our mother's boutique botanical brand. Sloane sold the narrative. She charmed the local distributors, schmoozed the wealthy wellness influencers, and spun poetic, marketable tales about the healing power of nature. The bitter, unspoken irony, of course, was that Sloane did not know the first thing about actual chemistry. She could not distinguish a basic lipid from a peptide, nor could she explain the intricate, painstaking distillation process that made our mother's life work so revolutionary. Sloane simply knew how to package the sweat of another woman's brow into a highly profitable, Instagram-ready aesthetic. I, on the other hand, was the disappointment. I was the dry, unsmiling pragmatist who possessed absolutely zero marketable charm. I realized very early on that there was no room in our household for two golden girls, so I abandoned the damp greenhouses of Oregon entirely. I moved north to Portland and built a fortress out of pure logic. I became a senior data analyst at Aurametrics Analytics, a high-level data processing firm where human emotions were considered a severe liability. My world consisted of massive, freezing server farms, predictive modeling, and relentless, unforgiving algorithms. At Aurametrics, we processed billions of data points for global conglomerates. My mind was professionally trained to seek patterns, to identify anomalies in endless streams of digital information. I did not deal in feelings. I dealt strictly in verifiable facts. I liked the cold, sterile certainty of my job. I worked exclusively with numbers, and numbers, unlike the members of my immediate family, did not know how to lie. This division of labor worked perfectly fine until the cruel reality of biology intervened. When the diagnosis came down, it felt like watching a star collapse in slow motion. Early onset dementia, aggressive and unforgiving, coupled with a cascading, degenerative physical illness, the brilliant, obsessive mind of Eleanor Klein was supposedly eroding, fading rapidly into the foggy abyss of cognitive decline. That was the exact moment Sloan initiated the greatest public relations campaign of her entire life. She immediately swooped in, abandoning her overpriced city apartment to move back to the farm. She aggressively seized the role of the ultimate, devoted caregiver. Suddenly, every social media feed was flooded with Sloane's agonizing, highly curated journey. She weaponized her grief, turning our mother's tragedy into a lucrative brand extension. There were countless photos of Sloane holding our mother's frail hand, perfectly bathed in soft golden hour light. There were lengthy, tear-jerking captions about the unbearable pain of losing a parent piece by piece. Sloane was harvesting sympathy from the internet by the truckload, cementing her absolute status as the selfless, martyred daughter. Naturally, I was pushed entirely to the absolute fringes of the narrative. I became the cold, distant sibling who only ever contributed by wiring substantial sums of money to cover the mounting medical bills. I was covering round-the-clock private nursing, exorbitant experimental treatments, and the heavy maintenance costs of the farm. I was bleeding tens of thousands of dollars a month, yet in the family mythology Sloane constructed, I was merely the callous ATM machine residing 300 miles away. The most pathetic truth is that I actually bought into the narrative. I actively convinced myself to accept the villain role. I looked at my mother, frail and seemingly lost in her own fading mind, and told myself that she desperately needed Sloane's soft words and gentle touches. I reasoned that a dying woman did not need my clinical efficiency. She did not need my medical spreadsheets, my actuarial breakdown of her life expectancy, or my grim, practical planning. I surrendered the territory to my sister, genuinely believing it was the right thing to do. I stayed in Portland, staring blindly at my monitors, paying the massive invoices, and quietly grieving the mother who was slowly disappearing. But the universe has a funny way of leaving digital footprints, even in the darkest mud. The cracks in Sloane's perfect, tragic facade did not start with a grand confrontation. They started with my telephone ringing at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was our mother. According to Sloane's daily internet updates, Eleanor was supposed to be completely unmoored from reality, unable to remember what she had eaten for breakfast, or even what year it was. Yet, when I answered the phone in the dead of night, the hushed voice on the other end did not sound confused. She sounded sharp, urgent, and incredibly focused. "Farah," she whispered into the receiver, her breath hitching with a strange, frantic energy. "Tell me exactly how corporate data privacy laws govern proprietary algorithms. If a digital file is encrypted at a root level, can an unauthorized secondary party legally force a decryption key during a hostile asset transfer?" I sat straight up in the dark, the cold blue light of my smartphone illuminating my bedroom. The cognitive dissonance was absolutely staggering. This was a woman who, just 12 hours earlier, Sloane claimed could not figure out how to operate the television remote. "Mom?" I asked, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "What are you talking about? Are you okay? Do I need to call Sloane?" "Do not call your sister," she snapped, the harsh, authoritative tone slicing through the shadows of my room. "Just answer the damn question. Farah, how do you build an unbreakable digital lock?" These late-night calls quickly became a pattern. 2 or 3 times a week, my supposedly demented mother would phone me from the dark confines of the farmhouse. She never asked about my day, She never talked about the weather. Instead, she interrogated me with frightening precision about offshore shell corporations, blind trusts, and the complex legal intricacies of intellectual property transfers. She asked about asymmetrical encryption standards and the exact legal precedents for invalidating a power of attorney based on medical coercion. She was probing my knowledge of data security with the intense, calculating focus of a forensic accountant. I tried to brush it off at first as the bizarre, erratic misfiring of a dying brain. I assumed her decaying synapses were randomly latching onto the corporate jargon she knew I worked with. But the questions were entirely too coherent. The progression of her inquiries was far too logical, too sequential. As I sat in the dark listening to her rapid-fire questions, the data analyst in my brain recognized a terrifying pattern. My mother was not deteriorating into madness. She was gathering intelligence. She was building something massive and dangerous in the dark, and she was secretly using my expertise to do it. The end arrived on a Tuesday in November. It was accompanied by a freezing rain that turned the Oregon soil into heavy, black mud, matching the bleakness of the hour. Eleanor Klein took her final breath at 3:15 in the morning. Sloan did not bother to call me until the sun was fully up. By the time I navigated the slick highways and arrived at the estate, the public relations machinery was already operating at maximum capacity. The funeral was not a space for mourning. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Sloan wore a veil of sheer black netting, an accessory that made her look more like a tragic cinematic widow than a grieving daughter. She had meticulously curated the guest list, inviting the local press, regional distributors, and every wellness influencer who had ever mentioned our brand online. It was a launch party for her own manufactured martyrdom, while Sloan held court near the expensive catered buffet, offering brave, tearful hugs to strangers and whispering about her unbearable sacrifice. I slipped away from the spectacle unnoticed. I drove back to the empty farmhouse. The silence left behind by death is a physical weight. It presses against your eardrums and suffocates the air in the room. I walked out to the main commercial greenhouse, the damp sanctuary where my mother had spent her life. The atmosphere inside was stifling, thick with the scent of wet earth, blooming nightshade, and the faint, sweet underlying odor of organic decay. It was the unmistakable smell of rot. The heavy rain pounded rhythmically against the glass roof, masking the sound of my footsteps as I began the grim task of packing away her specialized botanical tools. As I moved a heavy terracotta planter near the primary propagation benches, the toe of my boot caught the edge of a wooden floorboard. It did not just give way. It shifted laterally. It was loose, not rotted through by the constant moisture of the greenhouse, but intentionally pried up and carefully set back into place. I knelt down into the damp dirt, wedged my fingers beneath the cold, wet wood, and lifted it away. Hidden deep inside the dark, muddy cavity was a thick, heavy leather-bound notebook. The cover was stained with soil and chemical residue. When I opened it, a profound, chilling sensation crept up my spine. This was her master ledger. It was the physical, handwritten manifestation of 40 years of relentless botanical alchemy. But the ledger was mutilated, dozens of pages detailing the precise extraction temperatures, the intricate molecular bonding processes, and the curing times for her most advanced hybrid oils had been violently ripped out. The jagged, uneven edges of the remaining paper indicated a frantic, hurried theft. Someone had panicked and taken the physical copies of the legacy. But the torn notebook was only half the equation. My mother was a scientist. She always kept digital backups. I left the suffocating greenhouse and went straight into her cramped home office. Her desktop computer was an archaic, dust-covered machine, running on outdated operating systems that I could bypass in my sleep. I booted it up, to a normal, untrained user. The hard drive appeared completely wiped. It looked like a standard factory reset, a clean, empty slate. However, I was not a normal user. I was a senior data analyst. I knew that simply deleting a file or wiping a drive does not actually erase the information. It merely removes the pathway, allowing the computer operating system to locate it. The raw data remains perfectly ghosted on the magnetic platters until it is physically overwritten by new information. I connected my heavily encrypted work laptop to her old tower, booted up a deep-level data carving script, and waited. For over 2 hours, the screen scrolled relentlessly with thousands of lines of raw hexadecimal code. Then, the shattered digital fragments began to stitch themselves back together. I meticulously reconstructed her deleted file directory, piece by piece. I found the hidden master folder containing the proprietary botanical matrices. I opened the encrypted metadata. The truth I uncovered was cold, violent, and utterly naked. The author properties on every single patent pending formula had been systematically altered. The original creation timestamps remained intact, proving the age of the research. But the creator was no longer listed as Eleanor Klein. The intellectual property rights, the literal digital DNA of our family business, and the culmination of my mother's existence had been digitally transferred. Sloane was cunning, but she was sloppy with the digital trail. The rights were not transferred to Sloane directly. I traced the digital footprints of the modified files, following the routing numbers and registry tags, until they led me to a newly registered holding company. It was a Phantom Shell Corporation incorporated in Delaware exactly 6 months prior. I accessed the state corporate registry records through a secure backdoor portal. The sole managing director and primary shareholder of that shell company was Sloane Klein. She had not merely been skimming petty cash from the business accounts to fund her designer wardrobe. She had executed a massive, calculated corporate heist right under my nose. I cross-referenced the digital transfer dates with the medical records Sloane had so publicly posted online. The dates aligned perfectly. Sloane had waited until the exact month our mother was documented to be in the absolute peak of her supposed cognitive decline, a period where she was legally classified as mentally unfit by Sloane's hand-picked doctors. Then, Sloane had guided a dying, supposedly confused woman to sign away the absolute entirety of her intellectual property to a blank entity. Suddenly, the suffocating isolation made perfect, terrifying sense. The aggressive gatekeeping, the endless social media posts, painting herself as the sole burdened caregiver while demonizing me as the wealthy, absent sister. It was never about familial love. It was never about the heavy duty of care. Sloane needed to create a total information blackout. She had to ensure I was kept hundreds of miles away, completely unaware of the legal maneuvers happening in the shadows of the farmhouse. She needed a vacuum of oversight. If I had been present, if I had glanced at a single legal document or noticed the structural changes in the company network, I would have stopped it immediately. She weaponized our mother's illness to manipulate those legal signatures without any interference from the only person in the family who knew how to read the numbers. I returned to Portland, barricading myself inside my apartment. I logged into the secured servers of Aurametrics Analytics. I burned every professional favor, utilized shadow protocols, and bypassed standard corporate firewalls to trace the financial arteries of my sister's Delaware Shell Corporation. The data scrolling across my dual monitors did not just tell a story of theft. It screamed a narrative of absolute predatory greed. I cross-referenced the corporate filings with active non-disclosure agreements in the pharmaceutical sector. I chased the digital routing numbers through a labyrinth of dummy accounts. By 4 o'clock in this morning on a Thursday, I found the buyer. It was a multinational cosmetics and wellness conglomerate, an industry titan notorious for aggressive acquisitions. But the truly stomach-churning part was not the identity of the buyer. It was the pitch deck. I managed to intercept a decrypted version of Sloane's marketing presentation. She was not merely selling stolen botanical goods. She was actively marketing the proprietary botanical matrices as her very own independent research. The glossy, high-resolution slides claimed she had spent the last 2 years tirelessly developing these formulas in a desperate, brilliant attempt to cure our mother's neurodegenerative disease. She had weaponized our mother's fatal illness a second time, packaging it as a heroic origin story for a line of high-end, overpriced face serums and cellular repair creams. The acquisition contract was already in the final stages of legal due diligence. The purchase price was $15 million. $15 million. Sloane was approximately 14 days away from cashing out, positioning herself to be featured on the glossy covers of national business magazines as a visionary entrepreneur and a devoted, tragic daughter. Meanwhile, Eleanor Klein's lifetime of genius, her authentic legacy, was about to be legally erased from existence, swallowed whole by a corporate giant and rebranded under Sloane's stolen glory. I could not let it happen in silence. I drove to the upscale, glass-enclosed condominium Sloane had quietly leased in downtown Portland, undoubtedly financed by the preliminary advance payments from the conglomerate. When she opened the door, dressed in designer silk loungewear, the scent of expensive perfume hit me like a physical blow. I did not yell. I walked past her, laid out the printed digital evidence on her imported marble kitchen island, and turned to face her. I told her I knew exactly what she was doing. I pleaded with her, appealing to a sense of family honor I desperately hoped still existed somewhere beneath her polished exterior. I asked her to stop the sale, to let our mother's real name remain on the patents, to just take a smaller royalty cut and walk away clean. Sloane did not even flinch. She picked up the printed data logs, glanced at them with mild amusement, and dropped them directly into the stainless steel trash can. She offered a cold, hollow laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. She looked me dead in the eye and told me to back off. "You have absolutely nothing, Farah," she said, her voice dripping with venomous confidence. Mom signed the transfer deeds in front of 2 state-certified notaries and a senior legal partner. She was legally lucid on the day of signing, according to the highly paid medical specialists I hired. "If you utter a single word of this paranoid delusion to the buyers, I will personally sue you for corporate defamation and tortious interference. I will drain your savings. I will bankrupt you. The paperwork is flawless. It is completely irreversible." She was right. That was the most devastating realization of all. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 3 hours, staring blindly at the steering wheel. The legal system was not designed to protect abstract justice. It was designed to protect ironclad contracts. Sloane had manipulated the timeline perfectly. She had manufactured a brief window of supposed medical lucidity, secured the signatures, and slammed the door shut. The law would look at the ink on the paper, not the toxic coercion behind it. I was drowning in a suffocating mixture of rage and absolute powerlessness. The villain was going to win, entirely protected by the very laws meant to prevent fraud, driven by a frantic, clawing need for a miracle. I drove the 300 miles back to the Oregon farm. The house was freezing, smelling of stale air and abandoned memories. I needed physical proof. I needed a hidden diary entry, a secretly recorded conversation, a drafted letter of distress, anything that could prove my mother was forced into signing those documents against her will. I spent 2 days tearing the farmhouse apart. I dismantled the floorboards. I emptied every single drawer in the study. I scoured the dusty attic until my hands were bleeding. I found absolutely nothing. I was ready to collapse from sheer exhaustion. On the evening of the second day, I sat down heavily on the faded floral sofa in the living room, fetid. My hands blindly gripped the old, worn throw pillow. My mother always kept tucked behind her lower back. It was her favorite pillow, the one she refused to let the nurses wash because she liked the familiar texture. As my fingers squeezed the thick fabric in frustration, I felt a hard, unnatural lump buried deep inside the stuffing. It was not a clump of cotton. I grabbed a pair of heavy fabric scissors from the kitchen counter and violently sliced the pillow open. Plunging my hands into the synthetic filling, I pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped tightly in a piece of clear plastic. It was a brass bank safe deposit key. Taped securely to the flat metal head of the key was a tiny, folded slip of lined paper. Unfolding it with trembling hands, I found a single line of text written in my mother's sharp, deliberate handwriting. It was not a message of love. It was a precise set of global positioning system coordinates. The global positioning system coordinates, punched into my dashboard, did not lead to a massive corporate banking vault in the city. They directed me 90 miles west, forcing me to drive through the biting coastal fog until I arrived at a crumbling, forgotten strip mall on the absolute edge of a depressed logging town. It was a bleak, decaying environment. Exactly the kind of place my image-obsessed sister would never set foot in her entire life. The faded gold lettering peeling off the glass door of the corner office simply read, Elias Thorne, Attorney at Law. I pushed the door open, a small brass bell chiming weakly above me. The office smelled heavily of stale peppermint and dusty, decaying paper. Behind a badly scratched oak desk sat an elderly man in a moth-eaten cardigan. He did not ask for my name. He did not offer a greeting. He merely looked at the heavy brass bank key clutched tightly in my pale fist, nodded his head slowly, and walked into a dark back room. When he returned, he was carrying a massive, securely bound leather portfolio that looked like it weighed 20 pounds. Your mother was the most terrifyingly brilliant woman I have ever had the privilege of representing, Mr. Thorne said quietly, sliding the heavy stack of documents across his desk. My hands shook violently as I unclasped the leather binding and opened the first folder. It was a comprehensive medical dossier, but it was not generated by Sloane's highly paid, hand-picked city specialists. These were independent, confidential evaluations from a secluded, out-of-state neurologist. I read the final summary paragraph 3 times. The black ink blurred together as the reality of the words crashed over me. My mother did not have dementia. There was absolutely zero organic cognitive decline. The confusion, the agonizing memory loss, the vacant stares into the distance, all of it was a meticulously engineered, chemically induced illusion. She had been purposefully microdosing herself with a highly specific cocktail of prescription sedatives to perfectly mimic the symptoms of advanced Alzheimer's disease, timing the doses exactly for whenever Sloane or her doctors were in the room. My breath caught painfully in my throat. My mother had faked the destruction of her own mind. Nestled beneath the thick stack of medical reports was a small, black digital flash drive. Mr. Thorne wordlessly turned his heavy, outdated laptop toward me and plugged it in. The screen flickered, and suddenly, the room was filled with her presence. There she was, my mother. She was sitting in this exact office, bathed in the harsh, unflattering fluorescent light, but she looked absolutely nothing like the frail, dying victim I had mourned. Her posture was rigid. Her eyes were completely clear, razor-sharp, and burning with an intense, calculating fire I had not seen in a decade. Farah! Her voice came through the small speakers, steady, resonant, and completely devoid of the trembling weakness she had forced herself to display for an entire year. If you are watching this, it means you followed the numbers. You did not give up. You always were my brilliant, logical girl. A heavy, painful lump formed instantly in my throat, choking my airways. It was the very first time in my entire existence she had ever validated my cold, practical nature. She had seen my true value all along. She leaned forward, looking directly into the camera lens with absolute authority. I knew Sloane would steal everything. I knew she was bleeding our operating accounts dry. And I knew she was planning a hostile legal takeover of the botanical matrices. If I fought her then, if I initiated a massive legal war while my body was actively failing from my physical illness, she would have dragged it out for decades. She would have frozen the estate assets, locked you out of the property, and let my life's work rot in an evidence locker just to spite us both. The formulas would have been destroyed. I had to let her think she won. I had to let her steal the legacy, so she would dedicate her life to protecting it. I turned her bottomless greed into our ultimate security system. She spent this entire last year preserving the formulas, paying for the legal patent securing, and inflating their market value on my behalf, entirely on her own dime, waiting safely until you came to take them back. Tears spilled hot and fast down my cheeks, splashing onto the dusty wooden desk. The sheer weight of her sacrifice crushed the air right out of my lungs. My brilliant mother had willingly endured the ultimate humiliation. She had intentionally allowed her favorite, golden child to treat her like a foolish, broken burden. She had suffered the indignity of being spoken down to, of being manhandled and patronized, all to construct an impenetrable legal trap to save her life's work for the right daughter. The video feed. Cut to black, and Mr. Thorne gently guided my trembling hands to the final, thickest document at the bottom of the pile. It was a supreme, irrevocable testamentary trust and asset reversion clause. It had been secretly filed and officially certified by a sitting federal judge, an old college friend of my mother's, who owed her a profound life debt. Mr. Thorne explained the legal mechanics with grim satisfaction. This master document legally classified every single signature my mother made during her supposed cognitive decline as the deliberate actions of a cooperating witness, participating in a covert, highly documented fraud investigation. The stroke of a pen on this paper instantly nullified the very legal existence of Sloan's Shell Company. It legally vaporized the fraudulent intellectual property transfers. This supreme document bypassed probate entirely and granted 100% absolute uncontested ownership of the farm, the estate, and every single proprietary formula directly to me. However, my mother was a master botanist. She knew exactly how a parasite fed, and she knew exactly what kind of poison was required to exterminate it. The transfer of total power to me was not automatic upon her death. It was completely dormant, secured by a psychological lock so incredibly specific it defied standard corporate legal comprehension. Mr. Thorne pointed his crooked finger to the final addendum highlighted in yellow. To activate this supreme legal weapon, a bizarre, highly specific condition had to be met. It was my mother's final, cruel test of Sloan's irredeemable character. The clause explicitly stated that the document would remain legally sealed and entirely powerless unless, and until. Sloan uttered the exact phrase, "Mom always loved me more." Furthermore, she had to say those exact words voluntarily, in the physical presence of a financially interested third party who was actively preparing to execute a corporate financial contract. My mother knew Sloan's arrogance was not just a personality trait, it was a terminal pathology. She knew with absolute scientific certainty that at the very height of Sloan's unearned victory, at the exact moment she was about to cash in her stolen lottery ticket and finalize the betrayal, she would not be able to resist twisting the knife one final time to elevate her own ego. Sloan's own bottomless, sickening pride was the only key on earth that could spring the jaws of the trap. The silence in the boardroom on the 40th floor was no longer just heavy. It was a physical weight pressing down on everyone's chest. My hand left the yellowed envelope, and I smoothly pushed the contents: the heavy Supreme Testamentary Trust, the independent medical certifications, and the black digital flash drive, directly across the vast mahogany expanse toward the lead counsel for the cosmetics conglomerate. The predatory, steel-gray-haired woman who had asked for that final verbal confirmation frowned, eyeing the materials as if they were radioactive. She plugged the drive into her sleek tablet and began to read the independent medical evaluations. I sat perfectly still and watched a masterclass in corporate panic unfold in agonizing slow motion. The senior partner's eyes darted rapidly across the digital screen, absorbing the video testimony of my entirely lucid mother and the ironclad federal judge's seal on the trust document. The blood drained from her face, replaced by a sickening, pale realization. She was a woman who dealt in mitigating risk, and she had just been handed a radioactive bomb of federal intellectual property fraud. She realized instantly that purchasing these botanical matrices from Sloan meant buying stolen goods, a move that would entangle their global conglomerate in decades of catastrophic litigation and public relations nightmares. Without a single word of consultation with her colleagues, the senior partner reached out and grabbed the towering stack of the $15 million acquisition contract. Her movements were sharp and violent. She did not merely set them aside. She gripped the thick parchment paper in both hands and ripped the signature pages clean in half. The sharp tearing sound ripped through the silent room, echoing off the glass walls. She threw the shredded pieces back onto the center of the table. Sloan let out a sound that I had never heard a human being make before. It was a guttural, wet gasp, like a drowning victim breaking the surface of the water only to find there was no air left to breathe. Her perfect posture collapsed entirely. She lunged forward, her manicured hands scrambling desperately over the polished wood to gather the torn edges of the $15 million agreement. as if she could somehow magically fuse them back together with sheer willpower. No, Sloane shrieked, her voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual melodic charm. You cannot do this. This is a misunderstanding. She is lying. My sister is deeply unwell. These documents are forged. The corporate lawyers did not even look at her. They were already packing their leather briefcases with ruthless efficiency, their faces masks of sheer disgust. The deal was dead, and Sloane was a massive liability. They were eager to scrape off their expensive shoes, seeing her corporate salvation walking out the heavy glass doors. Sloane spun toward me. The mask of the grieving, beautiful daughter had completely melted off, revealing the raw, ugly desperation underneath. Her perfectly applied makeup was smudged, and her eyes were wide with a terrifying, hollow panic. She threw herself around the corner of the table, reaching out to grab my shoulders, attempting to force a sudden, nauseating display of sisterly affection. Tears streamed down her face, real tears this time, born from the absolute terror of losing everything. "Farah, please," she sobbed, her voice trembling violently. "We are blood. We are sisters. We can fix this together. I was going to share the money with you. I swear I was. Please do not do this to our family." I did not flinch. I did not move away. I simply looked at her hands clutching my jacket, and then I looked directly into her terrified eyes. I felt absolutely nothing. The data analyst in me analyzed the situation and found zero value in her emotional performance. I reached up, calmly removed her trembling hands from my shoulders, and pushed her away with a cold, absolute finality. "Numbers and signatures do not lie. Sloane," I said, my voice as flat and sterile as a frozen server room. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely logical. By the time the sun set that evening, Sloane had lost far more than a $15 million payday. The conglomerate's legal team immediately reported her fraudulent shell company to the Federal Trade Commission to protect themselves from any implication of collusion. The moment the news broke, the regional distributors and wellness influencers who had paid massive advance fees for her exclusive products realized they had been conned. They unleashed a tidal wave of massive civil lawsuits. Within 72 hours, a federal judge ordered a total freeze on every single one of Sloane's personal and business bank accounts. Her luxury condominium was seized, her designer assets were liquidated, and she was left facing potential criminal charges for wire fraud and elder abuse. Her carefully curated world was completely pulverized into dust. As for me, I officially took over the sole control of my mother's estate and her life's work. I did not keep the botanical matrices locked away in a corporate vault to maximize profits. I took every single proprietary formula, every extraction temperature log, and every complex cellular blueprint, and I uploaded them into an open-source global medical database. I made my mother's genius entirely free and publicly accessible to any university researcher, independent botanist, or medical professional on the planet. It was exactly what she would have wanted. It was a final, devastating strike that permanently shattered any dream Sloane ever had of holding a monopoly over our mother's legacy. I walked out of the towering glass skyscraper and stepped onto the busy Seattle pavement. The heavy clouds had finally broken, and the late afternoon sun cast a cold, sharp light across the city. I pulled my coat tighter against the chill and took a deep, grounding breath of the crisp air. I did not smile triumphantly. I did not shed a single tear of sorrow. I simply felt an immense, profound emptiness being filled with absolute, unshakable peace. The true legacy of a mother's love had finally been placed exactly where it belonged. Thank you all so very much for listening to the end of this journey. I would love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from today? Please let me know down in the comments. As I mentioned earlier, since YouTube has completely disabled our monetization, we simply cannot afford to produce and upload new videos here anymore. We will be moving all of our operations over to Patreon. If you found today's story engaging and want to hear more of the absolute best, fully detailed, and exclusive true stories with our full cast of voice actors, Stories that are far too intense for us to ever make public on YouTube. Please help us out by joining our Patreon community. You can simply scan the QR code right here on the screen, or use the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. Your support is the only way we can keep bringing you these incredible stories. Thank you again, and I hope to see you all over there.